Welcome to the post-screening lecture of the 8th week of the course Culture of the Middle East in the Cinema. This week's film was The Barbecue People by David Ofek and Yossi Madmoni from 2003. This film is one milestone among a few on the road of shaking the hegemonic voice in Israeli society by a group which some of its members started calling themselves Arab Jews. That is, Jews who are Arabs. The Jewish groups that came up with the idea of Jews immigrating somewhere in order to have an autonomous ruling were European Jews who were educated into the secular nation state in which all citizens have equal rights. The Jews of Europe wanted to join this new state system, but in the European context, they were constantly singled out as Jews, if not on a regular basis, so when things got rough. Their initiative was to have a status of autonomous society in Palestine under the Ottoman rule. The rise of socialism in Russia, in which Jews were heavily involved, and the arrival of such Russian Jews in Palestine in the 20s and 30s of the 20th century, made the active Zionist Jewish population secular and socialist, and this became the hegemonic culture, as they were the ones to establish and populate the early institutions which later became the State of Israel, such as the kibbutzim, of which you already know. Judaism for these people was more a culture than a religion, and they intentionally rejected Jewish life in a diaspora, which they considered as submissive and weak. They were dreaming to establish a new Jew who is free, strong, self-sustaining, has connection to the land, and is not restricted by backwards religion as it was considered then. These people had European culture background, as I said, democracy, equality, feminism, and many had socialism as their ideology as well. And now, who were not included in this utopian picture? Surprisingly, the religious Jews, those who have religious values living in the traditional Jewish religious way. Such Jews were in the countries of origins of the early Zionists, but also in Palestine, in Jerusalem, in Safed, and in other places. Also, Jews who lived in Muslim countries, Morocco, Syria, Yemen, they were not taking part or not actively or not as much in the Zionist endeavor, at least not so much in the early stages. These Jews from Muslim countries are the focus of this week's film, The Barbecue People. But in order to establish a Jewish society and later a state, the Jews in Palestine had to rely on other Jews joining the enterprise, that is, on immigration. Intensive immigration of Jews to Palestine started in the end of the 19th century and has not ended. It is a process which is still going on. It is usually coming in waves, this immigration, waves which are influenced by what is happening to Jews outside of Israel, such as wars, economic disasters, or outburst of anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism. Since the establishment of the state in 1948, Jews from some Muslim countries had to leave because of their situation in their home countries was precarious. A big group arrived from Russia after the 6 Days War, and another wave of Russians after the fall of the Soviet Union. This is still going on. For example, an increase of immigration from France was seen after some cases of violence against Jews took place. Each group changes the character of the country and of the culture to some extent, as happens whenever there is a big wave of new incomers into a culture. The question of how the new group integrates into the existing society depends on their ability to manipulate their way into existing institutions, or on the way to integrate into the hegemonic narrative. We will now look at the integration of the Jews that came in the 50s and in the 60s from Muslim countries to the new state of Israel. Jews came from many Middle Eastern countries. Here, for example, are Jews from North Africa. You see here the typical clothes from what they call the Maghreb. And here, Moroccan Jews already in Israel in their festive clothes. These are Berber Jews. And here, Yemenite Jews being brought in a plane, which for most of them was the first time in their lives that they have seen a plane and flew in it. Here, they are typically studying from one book, all children sitting around the book. So some children were reading backwards. It was a well-known phenomenon in Israel that Yemenite Jews could sometimes read upside down as fast as other people could read right side up. Here are Jews from Kurdistan, who, unlike the other Kurds, did not speak Kurdish, an Indo-European language close to Persian, but spoke a unique language, one of the only ones which continued the Aramaic, the language which Jesus spoke, if you want to contextualize it. Being of Middle Eastern origin, their form of secular nationalism, if at all, was different. And typically for Western attitude at the time, the cultural diversity of the Jews from Muslim countries was overlooked. Therefore, they were conceptualized by the Westerners as others, or even primitive, and needing of education, which means that they were pushed to learn and accept the hegemonic values. The protagonists of the film are four members of one family, two parents who came from Iraq, and their two children who are now a young man and a young woman. The plot of this film circles around the celebration of this family, together with their extended family, on Israel Independence Day. The celebration typically takes part in a park with a barbecue meal. From this setup, the plot splits into four different stories, one of each member of the family, stories which crisscross, and we sometimes see the same scene serving in two or three different stories, which might be exactly the same scene or a shot from a little bit different angle. So Chaim, the father, is a kanun player who was very famous in Iraq and who did work for the anti-regime movement with the help of the Israeli secret forces. He finds out one day that his identity is stolen and someone else claims to be the great player and the hero. He sets out to restore his identity by traveling to the United States, where an old friend is supposed to be living, to testify for Chaim's identity. His mission does not succeed because his son, who lives in the States and is supposed to help him, disappeared, actually returned to Israel, as we will see later. The wife, Naima, is lured into the arms of a very rich and criminal man, Ezra, her ex-lover from Iraq, by being sold an incomplete chicken. After seducing her, Ezra dumps her, But the meeting still influences Ezra for the better, and he avoids killing Na'ima's son, who happened to expose the murder plans of a daughter of a kosher meat supervisor, so that he, the supervisor, will be grieving, and Ezra would be able to smuggle his cheap and not kosher meat into the country. So Na'ima's son, Eli, was safe. Eli's story is that he went to the United States with a plan to become a film director and ended up making trash films with his girlfriend as a star. This girlfriend was the daughter of the kosher meat supervisor, whom the assassins sent by Ezra killed. Eli is expelled from the United States. This is why Chaim did not find him in the States when he came there, and goes to his girlfriend's family, finds out about her religious background, as well as her twin sister, whom he tries now to date. Tikva is the one overlooked by the whole family. She is serving in the army and is unwillingly pregnant, but her difficulties are overlooked by all other family members who have their own problems. Even her big brother, Eli, disappoints her by returning from the States, as she wanted to follow him there after she is finished with her military service. Tikva's story ends the circle of the Ida family, but she is also the connection to the fifth story, related to the place, not to the people, the story of the man with the lighter. This man came from Iraq with his father straight into the 48 war, and both men found themselves in a bunker in Ashdod, while the Egyptians were attacking and almost conquered the city. The father went out to seek for help and was killed immediately. At the time of the film, we see the son returning to the place where the father was killed, and Tikva finding the lighter that was in his father's pocket. This film was made in 2002. It is an important milestone in the integration of Iraqi Jews and Jews from Muslim countries in general in the Israeli hegemonic narrative, as it is a film in which the story of Iraqi Jews is told not as a story of a weakened group, but as a story of strong and agented people, even though finding themselves in very alien circumstances. This was not always the case. Portraying Jews from Muslim countries in this way in the cinema. For a long period, Jews from Muslim countries were put down socially and culturally. Here is Professor Ella Shochat, who teaches at the Department of Art and Public Policy and Middle East and Islamic Studies at New York University. She's a person from Iraqi origin, and she's here describing her experience in Israel as a young child with Iraqi background.
I always knew I was Iraqi, and in fact what's shocking is to see, even before I understood anything about this the conflict, the ethnic conflict within Israel, I was so terrified of speaking Arabic outside in the street. I was so conscious that the European Jews gazing at us for being different, almost not only making fun of us, but really looking at us with hostility. My father remembers that when he went to work in the early days after arriving to Israel, then there were some other Iraqis, and they were speaking in Arabic, and their Ashkenazi European Israeli boss was saying, you're speaking Arabic? This is not an Arab state. This is Israel. We speak here Hebrew. So in a sense, the policing, this was among colleagues, friends. There was a policing from the very beginning of our cultural identity and our belonging. And in a sense, those kind of experiences became so traumatizing that we internalized that voice or gaze, not to listen to Arabic music, not to speak Arabic. But at the same time, we continue doing it at home. So in a sense, I often talk about it as a kind of a schizophrenic existence, as kind of a split personality. You're trying to live to a certain kind of Euro-Israeli ideal of identity, while at the same time in your community, you're practicing something completely different. We were, at home we would listening to the Arabic-speaking station on television, on the radio. We would hear Kulthum, Nazam al-Ghazali, Salima Pasha. This was the music I grew up with, the Iraqi food. I often feel like that the way for my family and my community to maintain their identity at home was music, food. But at the same time, in the public sphere, they might have fought against racism, but it took many years for them to assert their identity in the public sphere. In fact, it was more my generation. Certainly in my writing, I've worked on this whole question of cultural identity and asserting my Arabness, my Iraqiness. That was not a simple thing to do, not even until the mid-90s. To do that, you were still very much punished in Israel.
Professor Shochat dedicated her scholarly work to theorizing the experience of Jews from Muslim countries in Israel. She coined the term Arab Jews and claimed that culturally these people were closer to Arab cultures than to the European Ashkenazi Jews. Arab Jews suffered in Israel from cultural suppression, which originated in the Orientalistic attitude as proposed by Edward Said with regard to the Arab world as a whole. She claimed in an article, which you can see here, the invention of Mizrahim, that the European Jews put together Jews from Muslim countries under one category, Mizrahim, Easterner, and would put down their culture not only for not being a European culture, claims that are similar to Edward Said's description of European attitude toward the Arab world, but also because it was the same, their culture was the same, as they said, as the culture of the Arabs, who were the enemies of the state. There's no such thing as Mizrahim, says Shochat. There are Moroccans, Egyptians, Syrians, Iraqi Jews, etc. Shochat's early work was about the cinema and the representation of Jews from Muslim countries in it. They were portrayed comically, in a derogatory way, as primitive, stupid, and uncultured people. One of the first films portraying Moroccan Jews, and in an Orientalistic way, according to Shochat, is the film Salah Shabati. We will hear about this film in the presentation next Monday. Shochat's work caused turmoil in the academic community and much anger. Especially angry was the anthropological community, people who worked with the immigrants from Muslim countries, as well as studied their culture and ways of life. One of these people is Moshe Shoked, a social anthropologist from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Tel Aviv University. His article on the sin we did not commit in the research of Oriental Jews will be presented in a seminar on Monday. In this article, he aims to refute what Ella Shochat and other scholars of her school write and say, and the blame they put on Israeli academia regarding the mistreatment of Jews from Muslim countries. And so now here are the questions for your assignment. for this week. First, please tell what are identity forming narratives or topics in the film for each of the four major characters, the members of the family. The second question is, do you detect generation gaps represented in the film? What are the points of friction between the generations? And the third question is a bit more tricky, but please try to think about it. Can you think of what is the role of the scenes about the 48 war, yeah, the scenes in black and white in the film? Yeah, so it's part of the story of the man with the lighter, but why were such scenes included in the film? They're not um, a very integral part of the story. So try to think about this. Submit your answers in the assignment, in the correct assignment button in the submission section on Nestor until the 14th of November. So thank you for listening and see you in the next seminar.